Good afternoon, family. World TV Talk Show. I am your guest host, the Reverend Dale Smith. Today, I have extreme pleasure. I have an iconic figure here. He's a great theologian, scholar, sage, author, great man of God. I have the pleasure of introducing the iconic figure of the Reverend Dr. Demetrius S. Carolinas. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Dale. I'm certainly honored to be here with you. You have a uncanny ability to sort of lift and also challenge at the same time. So I'm glad to be here today.
Well, I thank you for that, sir, and I've learned a lot on your tutelage. So, Dave, Pastor, if you could tell us a little about yourself. I know you need an introduction in the Northeast, but we have viewers from all over the world. Tell us a little bit about yourself, sir.
Demetrius Carolina, born in Harlem, New York, raised in South Jersey, Atco, New Jersey, West Atco, New Jersey, and spent summers in Orangeburg, South Carolina, and back up in Harlem. Sort of educated. Actually, interesting story. I was accepted at Morehouse. Went there on a summer college visit with a good friend of mine, James Smith, both to Morehouse and to Hampton, Howard in D.C. And we were young, so when we went there, the ratio was 7-1, women to young men. So I decided to go back to Jersey to school because I didn't want to waste my mother's money. So I have an associate's degree in communications from Camden County College, a bachelor's from Richard Stockton University in Pomona, New Jersey, master's from Temple University in Education and Administration, went to Westminster Theological Seminary, and also Philadelphia College of the Bible, and I have a doctorate. I started off my doctorate at NYU and finished up at University of Phoenix, and that is in educational administration and leadership as well. Pastor, one of the most exciting, progressive, and growing churches in Staten Island, the First Central Baptist Church, and also executive director of the Central Family Life Center. We are the largest predominantly black and brown nonprofit in Staten Island. We have 22 different programs. One of our anchor programs is an anti-violence initiative called True to Life. It's a CMS program, Mayor's Crises Management Systems program. It is an anti-violence group, and then we have a youth build program, which is really significant in that we are blessed to have young people who may not fare so well in the traditional learning arena, but come to us and secure their GED and or high school equivalency, and we sort of pipe them into either college and or vocational programming. And then we have wraparound services that we provide for all of our participants. We have I like to say from cradle to grave. We have senior citizen programming, Tech Savvy Senior, and then we have after-school tutorial services. And we have a Saturday Academy, which I know you're extremely familiar with because you lead it. And I'm excited about that Saturday Academy because we sort of take students and not only through DOE, Department of Education, educators, but also culturally competent educators, and sort of allow them to see the world from various perspectives, from a really culturally competent perspective, and then also pipe them into the academic programs that they may not in traditional environments be afforded an opportunity to experience. So we have quite a bit going on. I'm also on the CCRB for the NYPD and for the City of New York, and formerly one of the commissioners of human rights for the City of New York, and on the water board for the City of New York. And so a lot of positive and busy things going on, and I'm excited about that. I also teach it. Adjunct professor at St. John's University and about 4 other universities around the city. So I guess I should say this. I am the husband of a beautiful, intelligent, and wonderful lady, Jacinia Ruiz Carolina, and I have 4 beautiful children that I'm blessed to father. The oldest is 26 and the youngest is 16 months.
Amen.
Busy and exciting life.
Well, we love that, Pastor, and as we all can see, you're busy in the vineyard, and always have been. So which goes, we're going to start to hit the ground running. Starts a couple of questions I have. One, being all the things you've done, there is chatter about the absence of the prophetic voice in the pulpit, coming from our prophetic voices, and we know, especially in the black church, they look for a prophetic voice in the pulpit. Do you feel there's an absence of a prophetic voice in the pulpit?
So, that is somewhat of a loaded question, but a very important and pointed question for the 21st century. And it speaks to what is the role of the preacher, pastor, teacher, right? And how has that role may have changed or grown or nuanced,
yes, sir,
given the time in which we live. When we talk about a prophetic voice, we're really talking about a voice that is being led by a power greater than the preacher, his or herself. In order to have a prophetic voice means that one has to be led prophetically, right? And must have vision beyond that of the natural man. So without saying if there is or isn't an absence, I will say that the hearers of modern day sermons and talks must say for themselves, are they receiving something that speaks truth to power? Are they receiving something that not only energizes and motivates them, but also corrects and instructs them, right? Because a sermon shouldn't only be something that simply encourages you or gives you something that you want to hear. It should also encourage you by giving you some instruction and some correction, right? So when we speak from a prophetic lens, we're not only telling people God wants more for you, we are also telling people God wants you to do more for others, and that God requires more of you, right? Little in, little out, right? So much prayer, much power, much study, much understanding. So prophetic utterance really comes from the idea and the reality of being empowered. So the preacher, his or herself, must seek ways in which to be empowered in order to hear God. God is always speaking. We're not always in a position to hear from him. Now, in a busy, busy world in which we live, that's not all. It is often easier said than done. We have to cut out time, carve out time to spend time with God. And the one commodity that we can never get back is time. Mm-hmm. So it takes some doing in order to actually receive a word that is a word that will correct, instruct, and encourage. It takes time.
Well, that's profound. Definitely profound right there, Pastor. But speaking to that and kind of follow up and segue right to it, social activism in traditional church, but the black church, to your point of people what they're listening to, hearing, but the church as a social activism, think of past days, civil rights movement, things of that nature, or even right now the Black Lives Matter movement. So how is social activism, in your opinion, and the church connected or not connected?
So when we talk about religiosity, we it covers history, it covers culture, it covers ethnicity, it covers nationality, it covers all of that. But specifically when you talk about the role of the church, that is the black church in the Americas, there has always been a social action component to what the church does. One of the reasons why every politician will come to the black church in 2021 is because of that reality. Mm-hmm. It is not a secret that the black church in particularly, not exclusively, but in particularly, has a social component to it, right? We often talk about, and theologians will talk about, social liberation or the liberation gospel, yes, as it were, and how our preaching and teaching is directly connected to the liberation of the people for whom we are connected to and indebted to and whom we serve. I would go further to say that during Reconstruction, even in this country, where you had more African Americans in Congress and you had more African American business owners and successful communities, the role of the preacher pastor in those communities was always a multifaceted role, right? We were always bivocational, as it were. The black preacher never had the luxury of being the preacher only. Now we highlight those preachers for whom are noted throughout history and were, well known as popular preachers. But the median church, even today in the United States, and this is without exclusion, black, white, or alike, has bivocational pastors who are professionals, teachers, doctors, nurses, what have you, and their median income in the United States is still $38,000 to $40,000 a year from the church, and is always supplemented by some other type of work or income. That's the median reality of the preacher. But in terms of the liberation component, black preachers have always had to be 100% preacher 24/7 if they were to be effective, because you're under a microscope. Your life is certainly not your own, and therefore everything that you say and do is under a lens, and the perspective is to liberate, to free, to elevate. Even the way black preachers historically have dressed, where they've lived, what they've driven, all of that had a duality. It had to do with lifting people, giving them some aspirations and some hope for a better life, especially in the United States of America, where many African Americans were marginalized economically, educationally, socially, right? And the vestiges of that reality in America still persist today in our court system. And if nothing else, through the pandemic, the social determinants of health, the disparity of our healthcare system were highlighted, so that although we may not hear it prior to the pandemic, that is, hear it talked about as much, we certainly felt it, and we still feel it. And when, as Martin Luther King was highlighted in saying, when America gets a cold, African Americans have pneumonia. Because the reality is that the most oppressed people systematically feel the brunt of any negative reality. It is always exacerbated in those communities greatly.
Amen. So I had one question, but you made me think of another question, Pastor. I was going to think of historical value of the social gospel, but I'm going to segue into this. I'm going to say, with that said, and I know the answer, now you know the answer, many times through media, which I know I feel slanted, that the religious people, the pastors you just described, the great things that's being done in the black church is not highlighted. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's been detracted from. Preachers are looked at as almost buffoonish, thieverish mode. Yet, I know the work you've done, other great pastors like yourself have done, and found tradition. Some have said that we need better PR as far as the church, especially the black church. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I have a whole lot of thoughts on that, but there's some fundamental facts, right? Perception is very powerful. And in many instances, people will say perception is truth or reality. So yes, PR is a part of that. But the other component to that is that there's a duality in responsibility when it comes to the black church, the black preacher, and the media and the social realities and constructs in which we live, right?
Yes,
social media and
absolutely.
Listen, if you are benefiting from the church and from a word of encouragement, instruction, and direction, then it is your responsibility to support that preacher, that teacher,
Amen.
That ministry, that church. And many people get and glean, but don't give back. Right? And then the other is true. It is the role and responsibility and calling of the preacher to encourage, to instruct, to lead, to guide, both when it is convenient and when it is not convenient. So that's the reality there, right? But then there's a whole nother component to this, and that is we do know that the powers that be have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. And when you see or hear someone who is praising or worshiping in their cultural normative fashion on Sunday and doing little throughout the week, then there is no need to interrupt or interject or try to change that narrative because it does not impede the status quo. But when you have a pastor, preacher, teacher, ministry, a group of people who are affecting change and changing the norms and behaviors of a community throughout the week, that can become a threat to the status quo. And who wants to maintain the status quo? Those who benefit most from the status quo. So you will have powers and pockets of influence that will paint a narrative that is certainly a subjective reality, but a narrative that because of their influence can become a part of an overall perspective that is neither true or factual, but it meets the need of that particular power, right? So I'm speaking to what you're saying, but I'm trying to speak to it in a way that really covers the socioeconomic factors that come into play when we talk again about social determinants of health, education, even the idea of family. I mean, I can go further and talk about the role of the church in the 21st century with millennials and with what family actually means. Because when people get up in arms about abortion, about homosexuality, about transgender, about those factors, the truth of the matter is that the black church has dealt with this far better than many other religious institutions, because the truth of the matter is we've always had to deal with these realities. We've not had the luxury of placating a false narrative because our people have died and are dying and are affected more negatively than other peoples because of the fact that we're on the ground dealing with these realities on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
I don't have the luxury to sit in a high tower and just simply point my religious finger. Our sons and daughters are grappling with, gun violence and domestic violence and institutional violence that is perpetrated on us simply because of the color of our skin versus the content and the nature of one's character on a daily basis today. So we have to be quick-footed, quick-witted, nimble, flexible, understanding, operate from a foundation of love versus a foundation of an organization. Even the names on our churches have changed quickly because of the need. So I am the pastor of First Central Baptist Church, but often when people will ask me, I will say First Central Church. And when I first came to First Central, many persons would say, well, why is it when you're in public and someone asks you, you always say First Central Church instead of First Central Baptist? I said, because I am first and foremost a preacher of the gospel, not necessarily of the Baptist gospel or a Lutheran gospel or a Methodist gospel, of the gospel, which covers the gospel. The denomination is Baptist, but the word transcends denomination. Quite frankly, it transcends race and culture, nationality, because the gospel is the gospel. We're all God's children. However, in the context of living, we're living in some constructed realities that man creates. Anything that divides is not of God.
I thought you on there, Pastor, and I definitely enjoyed your answer to it, which brings me to this then, is that with that said, and great things we're doing with you in church, we have a segment now in society I can loosely use the word the unchurched, those who have never been to church, which was not the case when I was growing up, for my generation. Even if you weren't going to church regularly, you had some connection. Big Mama took you to church, and you was going to church regardless if you wanted to go or not. But it's not the case now. And I know I'm speaking to the choir, but we meet people that have never been inside a church, black church, whatever church, have never been in the church. Yet, they do come for resources. They know that part of it, the church does do things for them. But yet, still wanting, looking for a spiritual guidance. Yet, they're a lot of times all over the place. So, speaking what you spoke of, how could you tie that all in as far as to the new, I won't say the new wave, but a lot of people are looking for newness, and also how people have drifted away, not only from the black church, but also looking for traditional African religions, other religions within the community, which we have to mention, but we know they're out there. They're in competition, and future church members are being evangelized by these organizations. And how do we deal with that?
Phenomenal. Always you bring some really relevant, important points and perspectives as well as questions. But it's not simple, right? The answers are quite complex. I think Barnard is great at this. He does a lot of study, produce a lot of statistical facts about church, millennials, and church today, and church attendees. And we know across the board the traditional religious settings and are down in terms of attendance. That's true across the board. But it is also the case that people are ever reminded, especially because of pandemics and climatic change and all of these realities, that we are not simply mind and body. We're mind, body, and spirit.
Yes, sir.
And there's always a longing when the spirit goes neglected, right? That being a fact and a reality, people will always come to the church, whatever your idea of church is, but the church being the spiritual reality that drives us beyond what we can taste, touch, and see. Mm-hmm. People will always come back to that at some point because of who we are, how we are created by God, right? That being said, the church itself has a responsibility to speak to the spiritual reality of all human beings, right? And that is directly connected to the humanity of all men. We also know that some of the deterrents or boundaries for people to come to church have to do with how religion has been manipulated to control resources and the narrative of culture, right? And how to serve as a way to keep certain people. I mean, even the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the great one of the great denominations, as it were, in the world, certainly in America, came out of that whole cultural construct of using religion as a tool to subjugate the masses, right? Mm-hmm. We know this to be a fact. So because we have some historical context, we can now use that to right some wrongs and to influence humanity in a positive perspective. And by that, I simply mean to speak to humanity about humanity and about the need to be humane to one another. Because what good is it to talk in theological terminology
Absolutely.
if you can't speak to the common need of eating every day and of having a meaningful employment, livable wage employment. Speak to unwed mothers and fathers, because we have now a lot of men raising their children for multiple reasons. Mm-hmm. And while prior men typically died faster than women because of war and because they were stressed because of the work environment and all of that is changing. And so back to the point about what is family? What are the roles of husbands and wives? What are the roles of same sex partnering in the church? See, I don't shy for those topics because these are the realities in which we live. And whether you subscribe or appreciate, like, or believe a perspective, we have a responsibility to at least be humane enough to hear perspectives and then speak our truth to someone else's truth, right? Because my perspective, biblical perspective, is that if love isn't the foundation of what we do and what we say, then what good is it, right? Amen. And then the other piece of that is, even if you have a perspective that is quote unquote right, because there are absolute truths and absolute wrongs, right? Rights and wrongs. But if it is delivered in an unloving way,
absolutely,
your point can be obfuscated, right? You not heard.
Absolutely. And to that, which brings me to what we do, which you have been a huge giant in, and I'm saying that I am biased, but I'm saying because it's true, that you've done phenomenal work in pastoral counseling. They've counseled people that you're talking about, the least of these, those that have been hungry, those that have been thirsty, those that have no shelter, those that are sick, those that have been in prison. How is pastoral counseling in 2021 going to 2022 with the lens? How do you see that looking?
So, pastoral counseling for me, when you say the least of these, is easy because I am the least of these.
Hallelujah.
You know, I am so privileged to be able to serve in the roles in which I have served and am serving in, given all of the statistics, you know, the realities that statistically I could have been, I'm not going to say should, could have been incarcerated or dead based on the
Absolutely.
social trends in this nation as an African American man in these wonderful yet to be United States. And I will preface that and counsel that by saying there's no other nation I would prefer to live in. I am a proud American.
Praise God.
However, I don't shy away from the realities, nor should anyone. Because we are endangered species, and any African American man who has a college degree, who has gainful employment, who is married and has a strong family unit, and is supportive of other groups, is a truly blessed individual, and in many instances a miracle. So that's a fact,
yes,
and we should know that,
yes,
and appreciate that and walk in that. So having said that, boy, Dale, we have so much work to do in lifting and enlightening our young people in particularly. The other piece is we have so many champions, older men and women, for whom they do what they do and do it so well and do it so regularly, sometimes we would miss opportunities to celebrate them. Because I believe by celebrating our seniors, by celebrating our grandparents, our mothers, and our fathers, we empower them to share with us how they could, they do this so regularly. They take little and make a whole lot, that it becomes what they do. It's just what they do. But there are times in which we really just need to stop and celebrate that. Create space to sort of talk about that and talk about how they were able to do that, which empowers our young people to a sense of appreciation. Listen, my mother and my grandparents especially had no vehicles by which to seek counseling, formal counseling as we, refer to it. The idea to think about thinking. They were busy doing. They were making bricks with no hay, no straw, right? They were building foundations for which we stand upon. And sometimes when we don't celebrate that and understand that, we run the risk of creating spoiled societies that feel that they are owed something. And I'm not going to suggest that all humanity is not owed something. It's talked about being humane.
Right.
But the reality is we can become very weak and become enablers if we don't gain a sense of appreciation for the struggles that brought us to where we are, you know. And we all owe our ancestors
absolutely
a great deal, because in many instances we understand the cosmology of America, but America wasn't the superpower, and America has not been around a very long time when we look at world history. And we got to understand, even as a nation, that when we stop celebrating the unique richness of all contributions, we run the risk of extinction is what I meant to say. We run the risk of extinction because we've not been around that long.
Right.
And there are nations been around much longer who understand the need to celebrate the accomplishments of those who came before us. And there's enough room for us to celebrate everyone. The church has a pivotal role in that. We celebrate everybody's birthday for a reason. Everybody was born.
Yes, sir.
And everybody's birth is unique as your fingerprints. And when you contribute, without you, what was contributed would have changed the entire reality for everyone else that you've touched. We need to celebrate everybody, everyone. We need to celebrate every good and every bad, because all of my experiences brought me to become who I am. And even something, when we're going through it, it looks bad. Only for later in life, especially those of us who are over 25, to say, that was ultimately a good thing. It
Absolutely,
built me. It developed me. It prepared me to be this and to handle this, right?
Definitely. So, which leads me to think of how you've always led a multi-generational church and how valuable, those who don't know, Dr. Caroline's always has millennials preaching on certain Sundays, runs a phenomenal senior program, and the richness, as you were alluding to, of elder versus young millennials, different generations. You even got Generation Z now, baby boomers, whatever category you fall in, there's a richness and value when they're all connected together, you know, in the house of the Lord. So that's powerful. So which also leads me to politics in the pulpit. So that leads, so how, as you did touch on it, about the politics of the community and the role of the church, but politics in the pulpit, some churches, some people try to stay away from it, shy away from it. Some people run from it and say, well, it's not my responsibility as as a theologian. But uniquely, you have led and speak about politics, the importance of it. So to speak to that for a little while, the politics and the pulpit, the tradition, as we mentioned earlier, the tradition of the Black church, that prophetic voice, but also where we are now in 2022, politics in the pulpit.
Recently, I've been reading and I've been sharing with our ministry circle at the First Central Church and several pastors I communicate with around the nation. Philip Brooks's book, The Joy of Preaching.
Yes, sir.
And in that, he does a phenomenal job in delineating between the person, the man, the preacher, the responsibility of the preacher, and then the spiritual reality that lifts and delivers and enlightens, that divine part that is not the man, but it is the preacher.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about politics, we really are talking about influence. We're talking about the give and the take. We're talking about the ability to change the social economic dynamics of societies, right? And so there is room for politics in everything, as long as you have people. Mm-hmm. Because as long as you have people, you're going to have some level of politics.
Yes, sir.
What we want and what we need to do as preachers and as religious institutions is seek influence to affect change in a positive way. And if anyone would argue that that's not the role of the church, then they would argue with the ministry of Jesus. Because Jesus was not ultimately crucified because he was a pacifist. He was crucified because he affected change, which affected the status quo.
Yes, sir.
So everywhere he went, change occurred. The role of the church is to affect change. And you can't be shy, weak, or easily intimidated if you're going to affect change, especially societal change or economic change. That is a threat to someone, some group, because we're human beings, and all human beings are creatures of habit. And you've heard me say this. We are most comfortable with that for which we are most familiar as human beings. So change is never something that comes easy for human beings. But the one consistency in life is change.
It's change.
So you can take it any way you want to take it. That's the reality in which we live. We as intelligent, Holy Spirit-led and driven leaders understand the importance of using our influence to affect positive change in society, or else what good are we? If we don't affect positive change for those whom we serve, then are we really serving them? I often say, if you call yourself a leader and no one is following you, you're just taking a walk. People follow leaders because of what they receive from those leaders, right? And to a certain extent, we follow leaders because we have a respect for the role of that leader. Even if we don't care for the leader as much, I'm being positively affected by the role of that leader in one way or another. Therefore, I'm a part of what this person is doing, right? Now, we would hope that people love their leaders and that there's a relationship there, a fiduciary relationship and a long-term relationship. But that leads me to another point. Good leaders produce leaders. So it becomes a shared reality, because you don't lead long if you're the only leader. Nor do you lead effectively if you're the smartest person in your leadership modality, in that group, that organization, that church, right? There needs to be someone that knows more than you know about a multiplicity of things, so that we all have a shared investment in this upward movement that we're all a part of, right? And then lastly, leaders build something that is effective. Leaders build something that is sustainable. My goal in anything that I touch is that it is better for my being and that it will last well beyond my tenure. Now, that is, I believe, a tool to use as a barometer as to whether or not you're being effective in leadership, in ministry, in service. Because again, I pastor a church, but I also am the executive director of a nonprofit. This is probably the fourth nonprofit that I've led. So I don't plan to be here forever, but I certainly plan for it to continue to grow. And I can look back over, now about 40 some years of service, and places where I have served before, I'm welcome back. That's a good test as to whether or not
yes, it is.
you were effective or good or
Yes,
or what have you.
Evangelizing brothers. I know it's again something I think we do. I know we do very well for First Baptist Church, but I run into a lot of brothers. I've said this before on this program, that a lot of times it seems that submission is the major problem of a lot of men, especially men of color, to submit and various other reasons. And again, going back to an earlier question I asked about those who don't enter church, rather go do golf and come to church in the morning, whether they go watch an NBA or NFL game, whether they go to church in the morning. So looking for new ways as an innovator that you are to evangelize men, because obviously it seems to be a little easier to bring the sisters to church, right? I don't think I'm talking out of turn here. I think it's real. But our good friend Dr. Juwanza Kujufu wrote this famous book, Adam, Where Are You? Talking about why black men don't come to church. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the insight on that.
So Dr. Kujufu and one of my mentors, Malafi Asante, Afrocentricity, all speak to this truth, and that is, I'm not asking men to submit. I don't think that is a foundational truth to encouraging men to be a part of the church or to be a part of anything that's positive. I'm asking men to partner. Because in my construct, and I'm talking about men now, my construct, every man has an ego. And that ego should be built on what that man has produced. Hear me now. Our role in society is to produce. It is easier, or we at least see more women in a religious institutional setting than men, because there is a therapeutic component to being in a fellowship for men and women. But we do know that women tend to be much more socialized and interact from a social perspective more so than men. A man can have one or two good friends and be happy. Women engage each other in multiplicity of factors, right? And I will argue that two women can have a conversation from a glance at each other. Well, most men have to have some dialogue, and you kind of know if a man likes another brother because they hang out together. They talk. If we have some negative tension, we kind of handle it and then move on. Women may not care for each other, but are in each other's circle on a regular basis, and that's, of course, I don't want to say that's a pejorative type of narrative, but by and large, that tends to be the case. So men don't need to submit to another man. I'm asking men, and I'll use the adage that we use, a brother, to relate, to share, because there's enough going here that we can share this thing.
Absolutely. And
in sharing, we grow a sense of appreciation for one another and respect for each other, right? Because we, through our interactions, sort of develop, train, teach, and mentor one another. So there's a role. There's a role for the younger brothers to train, nurture, develop me, and there's a role that I have to train, nurture, and develop them. There's a role for older brothers who've experienced more days and nights than I have, and seasons to share. Because if you are alive, you have something to share. If at the worst is not to do what I've done, and this is what I've done that I don't want you to do. At best, these are the steps to my success that you can glean from, because you're unique. You're going to take this and nuance it in a way that speaks to you and your reality. But these are the things that I've used to do this. Famous Amos came to a church that I formerly pastored in the Bronx. He had a connection there through family. And I will never forget, I didn't know who he was when he was there, but I was doing a financial freedom series that I had done previously in Philadelphia and in New Jersey. I was doing it in the Bronx. And the church was packed. It was a packed crowd of folks from varying economic, situations and the like. And he sat there, and I talked about, at the time, Walmart was new, but, there's a family that drives Walmart and Kmart and all these major, And so I shared with them the reality of these families and the historic significance in the United States with these families with historic capital and all that, or other groups without that, and how collaborative economics was key, some of the principles that we deal with.
Sure.
And then, I don't know, he was just struck to share. And prior to that, again, I did not know who he was. And he said something, and he was much older than I at the time, but said to me, "Young man, you've re-encouraged me in the possibility of our people in America." To hear a young man say this, and then at the end, and I just sat and listened to what he had to say, and he shared some of the gaps that were in my presentation. He filled them in through experience, and of course, needless to say, he was an extremely successful man. At the end, he said, "And I want you to know who I am," and he said who he was. People applauded. I applauded. It was just great to have him there, and even more so for him not to have said who he was prior to that. And he left a lasting impact on me, but not only on me, but on all those persons that were in that room. And from there, I would tell you that I still have connections to a number of people who, from that setting, went on to do phenomenal things economically and socially, and are still doing that until today. So you never know who you impact, but my point is there is room for everyone.
Absolutely.
And because we were successful doesn't mean we can't be more successful, or that someone who, whatever your definition of success is for that matter, haven't been recognized or done with it, that they can't contribute and add some value to what it is that is your experience. Because at the end of the day, my definition of success in my 50s is certainly different than my definition of success in my 20s.
Absolutely.
Right? And then when I come home at the end of the day, whatever has happened at the end of the day, and there's a loving person there, my wife, and a beautiful baby, and what I get from that, that is that is my definition of success, more so than some other definition. But that's where I am at this juncture. Everybody's at a different place, but we all need clothing, shelter, food. So to that extent, we can all share, and at least we want those things. But beyond those things, what do we want? We want legacy. We want history.
Absolutely. And you've led that, Pastor. You've led that institutionally since I've known you. And I would say, again, I use the word innovative, but also that the exception versus the rule. In finance, I could say you my financial guru, and I think that is valuable. And some churches have doing it, a lot of churches have not doing it. But the value of that, I think, to speak to the audience about the value of having your church speak to that, where a lot of times maybe the only opportunity, as you alluded to earlier, about not being able to have counseling, but then also financial counseling. Am I financially healthy versus am I spiritually healthy? How powerful that is for my spiritually to say, listen, we love the Lord, but the Lord wants you to be financially well off as well too. So it also brings me to another point, but I'm going to speak spiritually healthy though, in your definition of being spiritually healthy and being spiritually healthy. I mean financially healthy as well as being spiritually based.
All right. So there's a lot to that too. You always you come in with these wonderful, relevant, but pretty weighty. So one, every pastor can't be everything to everyone, right? So my advice is never be afraid to bring in the experts.
Yes, sir.
Be it financial literacy, investments, or mental health. I'm having these conversations with pastors around the nation too about, after the pandemic, the realities of mental health being, exacerbated, and needing to bring in these professionals to speak to the need, and how, previously in many religious settings, when people suffer with depression and the like, they would say they were demon possessed or what have you, versus how we've grown light years. Same thing is true about finances. You know, the church has a way of sort of having a pendulum effect. You know, at one point in the New Age, all you heard was, you know, wealth, wealth, wealth. You know, God wants you to be wealthy. And now we're sort of swinging back to a more biblical centered perspective on wealth in terms of a part of your holistic health, mind, body, and spirit. And that is okay, because God had some rich folks in the Bible who did good, and many poor folks who did very well as well, and that He ultimately will sustain and keep us. So there's a healthy balance somewhere in there.
Yes, sir.
So the point I want to bring to bear is that we do need to seek the experts that are amongst us, who can speak from a culturally relevant perspective as well. What good is having all of this information if you can't get it across to people? Then the other piece is we have to have people who are willing to hear it as well. I mean, you can give all the best advice, direction, and information. If people aren't ready to hear it or willing to hear it, then that's senseless as well. It's a vain venture. So my frame of reference has always been to seek folks who want information and are willing. It doesn't have to be everybody. If it's two, it's okay, it's good. And then bring as much resources to them as possible and let them grow from it and have others see their success, and then they sort of lend it. And then again, my perspective is that I may not be the one, even if I have the information, I may not be the right one to give this information to this group or to this individual. Maybe they can't receive that from me. Right. So I have no problem in bringing in people who people can receive information from.
Sure.
A pastor and I pastored a church. Another pastor came to that church, and when I initially moved on, many of the members had a relationship. And so when a family member passed on or wanted to get married, they would call me, although the church had a new pastor. Well, what was so good is that I had a relationship with that pastor. So when they called me, I would call him. Amen. And vice versa. When they would ask him if I could come, he would call me. And that eased the tension. You know why? Because he didn't have a problem. He didn't have an ego, or was so easily intimidated that he had an issue with my coming back. And my ego wasn't that big that I wouldn't come back. And the same thing is true of the church that I went to. People had a relationship with that previous pastor. Whenever they wanted that pastor there, not a problem at all. Good, as a matter of fact,
Amen.
Because some people can speak to some people, and then you've got to build your own relationship with people and groups. That's often what's missing. And what happens when that is not communicated, you have people who are like-minded and enjoy each other's company.
Yes,
and if we're not careful, it becomes a silo or a clique or an enclave. And so persons who can add some additional benefit to that group will never get in. And sometimes it's unconscious. Sometimes people just don't feel comfortable because they don't feel like they're welcomed. And that may be the furthest thing from the truth, but perception, again, is very, very powerful. So that's also a truth to churches or to organized religion.
Absolutely.
Or organized settings or to groups. We have to seek ways in which to invite folks in. Then, you've heard me say this many times, especially in a church setting, we are comfortable doing what we do the way we do it. And if someone else who doesn't do what we do the way we do it isn't invited in, we'll never see that there's another way to do it.
Yes, sir.
So in our homes, there may be a hole somewhere on the wall. And we say, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that. After a while, you don't even see the hole on the wall. It takes someone else coming in and say, oh, this is so beautiful, but why is that hole there? You're right. It's been there so long that it's become a part of the character of the wall. And it's become okay because it's part of what I see daily. Right?
Sure.
So in our situations, in our churches, in our groups, and I don't care what ethnicity, it is true because human beings tend to be human beings. We have to sometimes be forced to look at things in a different way. Does Sometimes it takes something different to produce something different and better from us.
Sure.
I hope that.
Oh, no, it clarifies a lot. In our winning moments here in time, though, I do have a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which all the topics are near and dear to my heart, as you mentioned, as well as you, Pastor. For those who don't know, we do missionary work internationally, First Central Baptist Church. I did coin a phrase while on the show, and really it came from me sitting underneath you, missionary in the hood. Doing missionary work in the hood, and what I mean by that, talking again to those in need, to the least of these, for lack of better words, but I think it's theologically sound. So missionary in the hood, we know the missionary work. I mean, so many times you see on TV people going across the water to the missionary work, but I think of Stapleton or Bed-Stuy or Camden or Watts, Southside Chicago. There's missionary work done there too. So in the few minutes that we have, how do we incorporate that and do a missionary movement? And if we could envision missionaries invading these neighborhoods and dropping missionary and dropping the gospel in a powerful way that you described this whole program that would elevate and free people.
Well, 2 Sundays ago, we had service, and we're doing we're virtual and in person, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a hybrid service we're doing. And during our in-person hybrid experience, about 7 people came to become part of our ministry, part of our church.
Yes, they did.
The work of those 7 coming didn't begin or end on Sunday morning. There was is a phenomenal young woman who ministers in the parks during the week, who speaks to women who've suffered from domestic violence and things of that nature, who came to me and said, are you? And my response was, absolutely, and what can I do to support what you are doing? Because the truth of the matter is, she can speak to people that I can't speak to. Reverend Dale, you can speak in a way to certain people that I may not be able to reach. But together, if we are united and we have a shared vision, not enough is said about the vision and sharing it. Even if our modalities are different and the way in which we reach that may not be the same, as long as we share the vision,
Amen,
everybody benefits.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So because of her ability to reach this group, they came. And once they came, then now we have 8 deacons for whom they can be handed over to, who can help develop them and grow them. And then from there we have 22 ministries for which they can be plugged into the areas of service that keeps them with us, because there's a sense of shared responsibility, right? And then they can then bring 70 persons each themselves,
Hallelujah,
to become a part of this. And talking about intergenerational, there were children, there were adults, there were middle-aged. So all of them have their own groups that they can speak to. Now, we can't own it. We have to share it. And what happens in a lot of organized religious settings is that people take ownership.
right.
This is mine versus this is ours.
Amen.
And everyone's perspectives matter.
Pastors, we still don't have enough time to glean from all your wisdom.
Oh, please. Thank you.
And it's been a phenomenal pleasure to have you on, personally for me. As we, last few seconds, if you could say a couple of words to the public out there in the last few seconds that we have, what would you say to them?
I would say that you matter. You are valuable. Your perspectives matter. Your experiences have brought you to where you are. Never be afraid to share who you are. Share your heart. There are times in which people will not receive it, but the reality is it's binary. It's either yes or no. So share. Feel loved, be loved, and be in a position for somebody else to grow beyond yourself. So thank you for this opportunity. Appreciate you.
It's an honor, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, again, you've heard some profound words from a profound man. Again, one of my personal and public heroes that I follow because he's following God. God bless you. We'll see you next time on World TV Talk Show. God bless.